Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome. On the second day of his historic visit to Turkey, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad met with senior Turkish officials, announcing from Ankara that the situation in Iraq is currently the biggest problem facing Syria and Turkey, and that dividing the country would be crossing a red line that neither country would allow, thus warning some groups whose goal is the creation of a Kurdish state inside Iraq. Turkey's President Ahmed al-Cesar responded strongly to Washington's statements that it is not prepared to intervene to prevent Iraqis from taking steps for creating a regional Kurdish government in the new Iraq. Meanwhile, there are new developments between Israel and Syria due to Israel's plan to increase its settlements in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights has been an obstacle to peace between Syria and Israel since it was occupied by Israel in 1967 and exploited for its rich soil. Syria filed a complaint with the International Court about Israel's escalating intentions to increase the number of settlements in the occupied Golan. The Vice Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, denied Israeli plans to increase settlements in the Golan. In Rabat, King Mohammed VI announced in the first meeting of the Council on Equity and Reconciliation that he will pardon 32 political prisoners. From them, 4 journalists, including Ali Lamrabet, as well as many Islamic and Saharan prisoners. Morocco created the Council on Equity and Reconciliation to turn a new page in its history and deal with past human rights abuses by the state against its opponents. Today, the Sudanese President Omar Hassan al-Bashir stated that his government believes that unity will determine the fate of the South by the end of the 6-year transitional period. Meanwhile, the Sudanese public welcomed the news of sharing authority.
Negotiators from the Sudanese government and members of the People's Movement in Navasha have reached an agreement to share the wealth. This accord renews hope for the negotiations between both sides, after weeks of difficulties since each side is holding steadfast to their position on the 3 areas the People's Movement is asking for. Meanwhile, internal Southern forces are actively working to help both sides overcome any obstacles to the negotiations, saying that this accord is a positive step towards achieving peace in the country. Some believe that the signing of this accord versus signing other agreements indicates that it will be difficult to immediately resolve these other issues. Meanwhile, a few Southern leaders who are abroad are promoting the idea of a separate Southern state.
Unity is the primary issue. Then the other topics will be discussed immediately after signing the accord. They will examine the reasons behind the separation and the reasons to unite.
The Sudanese opposition sees the accord as a positive beginning for the last round of negotiations. However, they question the legality of the accord, since they were not at the negotiating table.
The Sudanese people are not being represented in the negotiations and the discussions being conducted in Sudan or Navisha. The Anqaz is the only party present in the meeting, but they only represent 10% of the Sudanese people.
The ongoing Sudanese peace negotiations prove that the 2 negotiating sides want to reach a solution in order to deal with the internal political struggles. This is in contrast to the international and regional suggestions, which may have been made for their own benefit. Asma Abbas, Abu Dhabi Television, Khartoum.
incessant Israeli aggressions is making the Intifada continuously glowing in Palestinians' mind, yet more means are being found to keep it a true reflection of the actual resistance to Israeli occupation, to be in its turn a key motive for more resistance to achieve the final goal, liberation.
What is it like living in the occupied territories, where images of blood and martyrs are even more abundant than one's daily bread? Surely it's not that much enchanting. It's more of pain, but a pain nobody wishes but to bear, to have one's land and dignity restored. A frightful pain that deserves to be preserved. The Intifada album has been found with this aim in mind.
Yes, this album not only for Palestinian children, but for the people in the world. I hope from the all children in the world to take this album and look what about the problem in the children's life in Palestine.
Ghassan, this young Palestinian boy from the West Bank town of Nablus, spends most of his time collecting Intifada stickers depicting images of the Intifada, the Palestinian uprising for statehood. He gathers with his friends during the many days in which schools are off due to Israeli continuous incursions, curfews and other occupation aggressions. The album makes us talk about martyrs and remember them, says Ghassan, vowing to continue collecting stickers as long as the Palestinians continue to fight for freedom. Like many Palestinian youth, Ghassan often finds himself caught in the line of fire during Israeli raids. They even spend days hurling stones at Israeli occupation vehicles, expressing their undying will to be killed as martyrs to achieve their national goal.
Palestinian Chairman Yasser Arafat on Wednesday poured scorn over Israeli pledges to evacuate at least some settlement outposts. Arafat said settlements were actually increasing. He said he called on Sharon to be fair after the Israeli premier renewed pledge to push through his so-called unilateral disengagement plan if peacemaking with the Palestinians fail.
In spite of what we are suffering, in spite of this Israeli government and their policy against the peace, we are committed to the peace of the period. And for this, we are ready to follow up the steps and the implementation of the roadmap on the ground. And we hope that, as usual, there are troops in Sinai, there are troops in South Lebanon, there are troops in Golan Heights. Why not here? Okay, they don't want to send troops, at least observers.
The Israeli Channel 2 television station broadcasted a videotape that shows Omri Sharon, the son of the Israeli Prime Minister, in talks about the illegal financing of his father's election campaign. Omri was shown sitting with two senior leaders from his father's Likud party, one of whom was offering to use party funds to finance Sharon's election campaign. Top police and judicial officials told Channel 2 the tape would likely spur a series of indictments against senior Likud figures in the near future. India and Pakistan agreed on the sidelines of a South Asian summit which closed Tuesday in Islamabad to resume bilateral dialogue, marking the first talks between the rival neighbors' leaders since they nearly went to war because of Kashmir in 2002. The foreign secretaries of India and Pakistan are expected to conduct the talks in February. The move was hailed internationally and locally. It was positively accepted through fears were not totally wiped.
India and Pakistan met Monday in the first talks since 2001 on the sidelines of a regional summit held in Islamabad, producing a surprise agreement to reopen dialogue in February. The formal talks, which tackle disputes including Kashmir, the cause of the 56-year tension and two of their 3 wars.
History has been made in that we have arrived at an agreement on taking this normalization process forward and setting a framework for taking it to its logical end, to its culmination.
The international community has hailed the breakthrough between the rival nuclear powers. At the United Nations, Secretary General Kofi Annan said the breakthrough would benefit all of South Asia, the region of 1.4 billion larger poor people, which has been held hostage to the disputes between its giants.
And improved relations between the two countries would mean a lot for the region, not just in terms of reducing political tensions, but also in economic and social terms. And it will be beneficial to all the smaller countries in the region. And I'm really excited with the developments, and I applaud the two leaders for the actions that they have taken.
The United States echoed Musharraf's description of the deal as historic. Europe, Australia, Canada and Japan called the decision to return to the negotiating table proof of their commitment to further strengthen the process of confidence building and to resolve outstanding bilateral issues. Pakistanis and Indians have cautiously pinned high hopes for peace between the two South Asian nuclear rivals after their breathtaking pledge.
It will be a very good thing if this dispute is resolved, because people of both countries are getting poorer and poorer. Joblessness is increasing here as well as there. It is better for the leaders of both countries that they come closer and have better relations. Atom bombs and war weapons all are harmful for people.
I always see the news and stuff like that. I think it will be very nice. The people of India and Pakistan should do it, or whatever. I mean, they should do it something, because people are dying for nothing.
The new warmth between India and Pakistan was tempered by the killing of 5 people in Kashmir overnight and by half a century of distrust and hostility. Kashmiri group, the Jamaat al-Mujahideen, urged rebels to increase their jihad against the Indian occupation of Kashmir, casting the Indian-Pakistani move to reopen talks as paperwork.
Japan gave a cautious welcome to North Korea's offer to refrain from testing or producing nuclear weapons in what Pyongyang called a major concession to the United States. Earlier in Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell said that he was encouraged by North Korean offer, which he called as an interesting step on their part and a positive step. For its part, South Korea welcomed the step, describing it as a positive move aimed at ending the nuclear crisis.
U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell said on Tuesday a North Korean offer to suspend its nuclear power program was a positive step that might help lead to new 6-party talks on ending its nuclear weapons programs.
To your specific question about what the North Koreans said, it was an interesting statement. It was a positive statement. They, in effect, said they won't test, and they implied that they would give up all aspects of their nuclear program, not just weapons program. And this is an interesting step on their part, positive step, and we hope that it will allow us to move more rapidly toward the 6-party framework talks.
For its part, South Korea welcomed North Korea's offer to freeze its atomic program.
We regard it as positive that North Korea has reaffirmed its intention to solve the problem through dialogue and stated a little more concretely the actions it is willing to take.
North Korea described its offer as a bold concession to restart the 6-way talks, which are designed to find a way to persuade the secretive communist nation to abandon its quest for nuclear weapons. Pyongyang made the offer as a private U.S. delegation that included congressional aides, former U.S. officials and an Asia scholar flew to North Korea hoping to visit the Yongbyon nuclear complex at the heart of the country's nuclear program. The United States has sought to persuade North Korea to undertake a complete, verifiable and irreversible end to its suspected nuclear weapons program through 6-way talks that include U.S., Chinese, North and South Korean, Japanese and Russian officials.
In a televised announcement, the Pakistani president, Pervez Musharraf, confirmed that he was subjected to another assassination attempt in Rawalpindi, saying that the attackers are terrorists and extremists. According to the Pakistani government, 14 people were killed and 46 others were injured in the incident, which took place 2 weeks ago. For the second time in less than a month, attackers attempted to assassinate the Pakistani president, Pervez Musharraf, using a car loaded with bombs. The Pakistanis accused Al-Qaeda and fundamentalist Islamic organizations in a similar fashion to what the Americans have been doing since the attacks of September 11th. Political observers say the attackers were motivated by an American war on Afghanistan because it created an opportunity for extremists to use violence rather than enabling people in the region to enforce stability and security. If the official Pakistani investigation is accurate in holding extremist Islamic organizations responsible, then one can consider several reasons that explain why they may have carried out the attack. The relationship between the Pakistani military authority and the Islamic organizations, which for decades were fostered by the Pakistani intelligence agency, have been strained after Islamabad allied itself with Washington in the war against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. At the time, the Pakistani people and government fostered all Islamic armed organizations to fight the Soviets and their proxy regime in Kabul. The Taliban originated from these Islamic organizations in the Pashtuni region along the Pakistani border. Another reason that may have alienated these extremist Islamic organizations is Musharraf's decision to concede to the United Nations resolution that granted the Kashmiri people the right for self-determination in 1949, including the right to establish an independent state. Musharraf announced that he is willing to negotiate with India to reach a peaceful settlement for the Kashmiri problem, which caused the two countries continuous war for the past 5 decades. Considering that supporting the Kashmiri struggle was a consistent Pakistani policy and the symbol of its national unity, one can understand why observers say that Musharraf has created an explosive situation. The Pakistani president made an initiative to reconcile with the Islamic Opposition Party by signing an agreement giving up his control over the army and other authority that he gave himself after he took power with a military coup in 1999. But that did not spare him a second assassination attempt. President Bush claimed the political victory in the Pakistani region in an attempt to win the presidential election. However, the second assassination attempt against Pervez Musharraf created tension and worries.
الانتصارات الأمريكية ولرئيس بوش وحملته الانتخابية.
نقلت وكالة الأنباء عن مسؤول أمريكي قوله إن
An American official said the Turkish Prime Minister will visit Washington at the end of this month. During this official visit, he will discuss the future of Iraq and the Kurdish region in particular. Meanwhile, the Associated Press obtained an amateur video showing fighters with masks claiming they are members of the Iraqi resistance. The fighters were sending a message to the Iraqi people, saying they are a coalition of resistance organizations that include the Army of Muhammad, Ansar al-Islam, Young Muslim Men, and the Ali bin Talib Martyrdom Brigade. News agencies said that strong explosions were heard in the heart of the Iraqi capital of Baghdad, indicating that American occupation forces in Iraq were carrying out operations against alleged resistance positions. The Associated Press obtained amateur video showing fighters with masks saying they are members of the Iraqi resistance. They directed their message to the Iraqi people, describing themselves as a coalition of resistance organizations that encompass the Army of Muhammad, Ansar al-Islam, Young Muslim Men, and the Ali bin Talib Martyrdom Brigade. The fighters vowed to continue the resistance operations despite what they called methods of oppression used by the occupation forces. The masked fighters vowed to continue martyrdom operations against the occupation forces and transform the Iraqi land into a graveyard for the invaders. They threatened to kill who they described as collaborators, spies, and traitors.
متوعدين بالموت لمن وصفوهم بالعملاء من الجواسيس والخونة.
Our operations will continue and will not be stopped by methods of oppression used by the infidel armies. Their objective is to put down the flag of Islam and to destroy the Islamic identity of all proud Muslims. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. They will not succeed. I swear with God, the Lord of the skies, to transform the land of Iraq into a graveyard for the invaders, our bullets into fire that engulf them, our bodies into time bombs against them wherever they go. We will transform the trees and rivers into soldiers to raise the flag of Islam and liberate Iraq. Death to collaborators, spies, and traitors who sold their religion for material possessions. May God curse them.
من ناحية أخرى تعرض قاضي عراقي لمحاولة اغتيال في مدينة.
Meanwhile, an attempt to assassinate an Iraqi judge took place in Al-Mosul in northern Iraq, injuring him and one of his sons. Eyewitnesses said that the armed attackers attempted to assassinate Judge Muhammad al-Jawadi, who was appointed by the coalition forces as an attorney general in a new court formed in Al-Mosul to fight corruption.
Someone tried to assassinate Professor Muhammad al-Jawadi at 8 o'clock this morning. Unknown assailants used a car to carry out the assassination attempt.
The attack, which took place in Al-Mosul in northern Iraq, caused serious injuries to al-Jawadi and his son. Sources from a local hospital where the two are staying revealed that al-Jawadi is in critical condition. However, his son is not.
Two American soldiers were killed in an attack that targeted a patrol in Baghdad as British forces wounded more than 10 Iraqis in Al-Basra. More on the following report.
Fierce clashes took place in the city of Al-Basra between hundreds of the former Iraqi troops and British forces of occupation supported by Iraqi policemen. The confrontations resulted in the injury of 10 protesters who demonstrated against the delay of paying their salaries. The injured were moved to hospitals as the bridge tank situated before 3 banks, where the demonstrators gathered. Meanwhile, several explosions were heard in the city of Baghdad while a U.S. patrol was targeted by Iraqi resistance men. The attack resulted in the killing of 2 U.S. soldiers. In Bakuba, scores of angry Iraqi mourners marched in the funeral of 2 Iraqis who were killed by the U.S. troops earlier. 2 French people were also killed and another wounded in Al-Fallujah. The spokesman of the French Foreign Ministry said that the 3 French were working for American companies. In Kirkuk, 3 people were wounded as a result of the blast of an explosive charge. In another development, the U.S. Army announced that American troops detained more than 50 people in operations that took place north and west of Baghdad during the last 24 hours. In Sofia, Bulgarian Deputy Minister of Defense Ikio Dimitrov said that about 40 Bulgarian soldiers refused to leave for Baghdad in the aftermath of the bloody events that took place in Karbala last December 27th, in which many Bulgarians were killed.
Israeli forces of occupation renewed today their attacks against the village of Wadi al-Askala in the center of Gaza Strip, arresting 4 Palestinians and devastating vast agricultural areas. In a similar incursion, the occupation troops confiscated vast areas in Al-Qarara town to expand the nearby settlement of Kesuvin. The Israeli authorities detained a Palestinian near the settlement of Kafr Darum. Meanwhile, the Palestinian National Resistance Movement, the Islamic Jihad, said that Sharon's statement about unilateral measures to segregate between the Palestinians and the Israelis aim to redeploy Israeli forces and legalize the Jewish settlements. President Bashar al-Assad visited at noon today the tomb of the founder of the modern Turkish state, Ataturk. He was received upon his arrival at the tomb by the commander of the Ankara region, the governor of Ankara, the head of the Ankara municipality, and a number of officials at the Turkish Foreign Ministry. President al-Assad laid a wreath of flowers on the tomb in the usual official ceremony. The president then toured the various sections of the museum attached to the tomb. At the conclusion of his tour, the president was presented with an album of photos of the museum's contents. The president then left the tomb with the same official ceremony.
Tehran accentuates that thawing of relations with Washington will come about only when the White House adopts a new approach towards Iran based on mutual respect and equal rights. Foreign Minister Kamal Kharasi told reporters in Tehran on Wednesday, Washington has thus far been pursuing a policy of imposition towards Tehran, while Tehran, heir to a rich civilization and relying on its revolutionary values, will no way give in to U.S. coercion. Commenting on the efforts underway to break the ice in ties between Tehran and Cairo, Mr. Kharasi added the two Islamic states' rich cultural and historical background, coupled with their revered political status in the region, all prove the pivotal role that re-establishment of Iran-Egypt relations could play in guaranteeing the regional security. Minister of Economy and Financial Affairs Tahmas Mazaheri has ruled out any trade transactions between Iran and the United States, now that Washington has temporarily lifted sanctions against Iran. The economy chief told reporters after a daily cabinet session on Wednesday, transactions with the U.S. would come on the back of a change of Washington's attitude towards Tehran. He added resumption of trade ties with the U.S. in the future depends on whether diplomatic relations are restored. Parliament Speaker Mehdi Karoubi criticized Wednesday's subjective use of human rights, democracy and the war on terror. At a meeting with the Irish Vice President of the European Parliament, Gerard Collins, the top MP said cultural, religious and social values of nations should be taken into account in dealing with the question of human rights. Recalling the heinous crimes the Zionist regime is committing against Palestinians, he said introduction of biased approaches to restore peace to the region will further complicate the crisis in the occupied lands. The European official, for his part, said Tehran plays an important role in settling regional crises and that the European Chamber is determined to expand ties with Iran in an all-out basis. An international gathering on dialogue among cultures and civilizations opened in Tehran on Wednesday. President Khatami told participants modern life calls for collective wisdom and dialogue, adding the pathway to dialogue passes through universities and other centers which promote thoughts and culture. He also warned that short-sightedness as well as unilateralism are as much harmful to science as they are to politics. The Iranian chief executive further said universities and centers of higher education can promote global interactions and that even if dialogue is designed to pave the way for competition, it would be less harmful than use of force and violence. The architect of the concept of dialogue among civilizations went on to say, efforts should be made to secure scientific progress on the basis of scientific freedom.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.